Warning: the content of these videos contains adult themes which may be distressing. Viewer discretion is advised. Everything you are about to hear is taken from court documents, trial transcripts and various media sources. Hello everyone, and welcome back to True Crime with Mystery Maverick. Today we continue to look at the aftermath of Darlie's arrest and the beginnings of the family's fight against the powerful systems. We dive further into the case files and the pre-trial hearings as we continue to delve into the mystery, dying for justice, the wrongful conviction of Darlie Routier. Back in the Dallas County courtroom, at the hearing to hold Darlie without bond, the prosecution would call Darlie Routier to the stand as their next witness. Davis would start by asking Darren about the night of the murders and the condition of the home when he went to bed that night. He asked Darren what was the first thing that woke him up, to which Darren replied, glass breaking and Darlie screaming, around an hour and 15 minutes after he had gone to sleep. He said he had been sleeping nude and had put his pants on and quickly made his way downstairs as fast as he could to see Darlie screaming at the bottom of the stairs. He said that he ran straight over to Devon at the far end of the family room but did not see Damon and ran straight past him. Davis asked where Darlie was while he was tending to Devon, and Darren said she was at the kitchen sink getting towels and that he could hear the tap running. Davis confronted Darren about why he hadn't mentioned Darlie getting towels to the police, but Darren was adamant that he remembers seeing it and that she brought a towel over and placed it on Damon while he was busy at the time giving CPR. Why would Darren or Darlie tell the police this? In the grand scheme of things, this detail seems insignificant and even unnecessary. Moreover, why wouldn't Darlie have made a point of mentioning the towels if she was indeed trying to cover up her activities at the sink? Furthermore, Darlie had never denied being at the kitchen sink because nobody had ever even asked her. Davis went on to ask Darren about whether or not he told the police officers that Darlie gave CPR to Damon, to which Darren responded, I didn't tell them she did CPR, she doesn't know how to do CPR. Davis asked Darren if the front door was locked when the police officers came to the door, and Darren stated that he did not know as he didn't go to the front door, Darlie did. Darren went on to say that he did not remember being approached by the officer as he ran across the street and that he was inside when the officers arrived. He stated that when he had gotten up from trying to help Devon and went over to turn his attention to Damon is when he saw the first police officer. He said he did remember going across the street to their neighbours to get help as she was a registered nurse. Davis asked Darren if he recalled giving a written statement to the police on June the 8th and if he had tried to give the most complete and accurate statement that he could. Darren said they had asked him to generally give a description of what happened that night, but he had told them that they would need to video or record him because there were too many things that happened in such a short amount of time and there were too many details to write down. Davis asked him if he remembered Darlie yelling out of the front door, to which he replied he did not remember and doesn't know because he wasn't there, but he remembers he yelled as he was running across the street to get Karen, the neighbour. When asked if he himself had gotten any towels for the boys, Darren replied, I did not. He said he didn't see any wounds on Damon as he didn't lift up his shirt and was scared to move him in case he hurt him further. Again, Davis would bring up Darlie's breast implants. He asked Darren when she had them done, where she had them done, why she had them done, and whose idea it was to have them done. Darlie's attorneys objected as to the relevance of the questioning, and Davis argued that it was relevant due to the fact there was no injuries to her implants. The judge overruled and Davis would continue this line of questioning. Darren said that they both wanted it done, but it was more him than her. Davis pressed Darren about the conversation they had on the night of the crime. In fact, you had an argument, or you had a discussion about a lot of troubles in your home, didn't you? Darren denied having any arguments or troubles in the home and said that the discussion was as per his written statement, that they spoke about the boys' upcoming trips and future plans. Davis asked if Darlie had been depressed and suicidal that night. Darren responded that she was not and hadn't been recently. Davis later went on to probe Darren about his relationship with Darlie's younger sister Dana, why he took her home, and if Darren had at all acted inappropriately with her and if Darlie had confronted him about it. Darren denied any inappropriate behaviour with her and said that he had known Dana since she was 3 years old and she was his sister-in-law and there was nothing else to it. Davis would go on to ask Darren about the towel on Damon's back and if he saw the towel Darlie was holding up to her neck. Although he did not remember the towel Darlie had, he believed that the towel on Damon's back was green and white checked. Once again, Darren stated that he was inside the house when Waddle entered the room and that he had stood there in shock for what seemed to be a long time, and no matter how much he pleaded with him, he just stood there with his eyes, quote, bugged out. He said he remembered Darlie was inside the kitchen behind the officer screaming. Darren further stated that the officer had his back towards Darlie and was not directly talking to her, and that he never saw or heard her talking to Waddle, and that he and Darlie were pretty much just screaming, which further contradicts Waddle's testimony that he had a lengthy conversation with Darlie at the bar. Darren said that he had heard Darlie say to the 911 operator that the assailant was inside the garage. Darren said after he had run across the street that he had returned to the house and had seen the cut screen in the garage and had felt like he had failed his boys for not properly securing the house. Although he had checked the garage door and the rest of the home, he did not secure any of the windows as he, quote, didn't even think about it. Under cross-examination, Douglas Parks asked Darren to identify his written statement before offering it as part of the record. In a strange turn of events, he then stated that he had no further questions and passed the witness. Under redirect, Davis asked Darren why he initially thought that the screen was the possible point of entry and exit, and if he had changed his opinion on this. Darren said while he believed that the screen was still the point of entry, that he had since speculated that the exit might have been different, as there was no blood or hairs subsequently found on the screen from the information he had been given. The next witness called for the state was the lead investigator, Jimmy Ray Patterson. He said that although he had been taken on a walk through the crime scene, that the crime scene work had been carried out by Sergeant David Neighbours and, quote, some people that work with him. Patterson identified the residents and said that upon his walkthrough he had seen the butcher block on the kitchen cabinet. He said he was shown the cut screen but couldn't decide whether it folded inwards or outwards and couldn't really remember. Davis asked if he noticed any blood on the windowsill beneath the screen, which he replied, no sir. He was further questioned about if he looked in the garage to see if there was any blood present. He said he did look in the garage but claimed there wasn't any blood, a claim that was inconsistent with later testimony by both trace evidence analyst Charles Lynch and serologist Catherine Long. Davis went on to ask whether Patterson saw any blood anywhere else, including the backyard, in the driveway and on the garage door, and Patterson replied he did not. He asked the detective about the kitchen area, the wine rack and the broken glass, and if he saw any bloody footprints at the end of the bar towards the utility room. He said there was not, but noted there was blood drops inside the utility room. He said at the scene he remembers talking to a fireman but can't remember any of the conversation and didn't take any notes. He spoke with Detective Frosch at the scene briefly and sent him on ahead to the hospital, and he arrived shortly after. He said when he arrived he went and met with Frosch, where they both had spoken with Darren, but he couldn't remember exactly what he said, apart from that he heard Darlie scream and he ran down the stairs and over to one of the boys by the coffee table. When asked what questions he had asked Darren, he again said he couldn't exactly remember. He said he did remember asking Darren about what had happened and asking about a cut and blood that were apparent on his jeans. He said they remember him having blood on his stomach and they took photos of him and confiscated his blue jeans and his underwear. Patterson was asked about the hospital interview and asked to describe the way Darlie looked. He described her as, quote, just lying there. He said that her responses to his questions were appropriate, but that she was not crying at that time. He said Darlie gave him a description of the assailant, but she could not describe his face at all. He said that she had described the intruder as the same height and build as Detective Frosch, something he later failed to mention at trial. He stated that she did not mention a struggle at first, but then goes into detail about her describing waking up and a man leaning over her and she struggled with her arms and legs on the couch. He said she then said she runs or walks towards the utility room before chasing him into the utility room and sees a knife on the floor. He said that Darlie told him that she didn't realise she had been stabbed until she reached the utility room. She further said that she had picked up the knife and placed it on the bar top and that her fingerprints might be on it. When asked if he thought that to be a strange statement, he replied no and said that he didn't find any of her responses to be unusual at the time. In what seemed to be an attempt to show Darlie as a mother who only cared about material goods, he stated that she had told him about her jewellery which she had taken off the night before and placed on the kitchen countertop, and that she was able to describe it in great detail. He was trying to imply that her memory was fine in regards to her possessions, but not for the events of that night. However, her memory for jewellery that she had worn for years is incomparable to remembering the face of a person she had never seen before in a situation she hadn't previously encountered. He further stated that Darlie agreed to undergoing a rape exam, but that she didn't think she had been sexually assaulted. He said that she never mentioned the kitchen sink or getting towels. Again, why would Darlie be thinking about telling them she got towels? This point would be insignificant, as she would be more concerned about trying to remember the perpetrator and the events that occurred immediately after she had woken up. He said that he then returned to the hospital on the 7th to, quote, see how she was doing, and she was not crying as he expected her to be. The next time he saw her was on the 8th of June, when she came into the police station to make a voluntary statement. He said that he read her Miranda rights and she signed the statement. He then went on to read her statement out loud in the courtroom. The officer would stutter when asked if he had prepared a written report or not. Yes, sir. Well, no. Well, yes, I did. He later revealed that he had only prepared the arrest affidavit attached to the arrest warrant. Huff asked the detective if he had asked anyone about Darlie being under anaesthetic, to which Patterson replied, no, sir. He went on to say that he didn't think it was important because Darlie was answering his questions. Huff would go on to ask him if he had asked what medication she was on at the time of questioning. Again, he replied, no, sir, and stated he didn't think it was important at the time. Huff then questioned him again about Darlie's behaviour at the time and what appropriate behaviour constituted suspicious and how Darlie should have acted to look less suspicious. Patterson did not have an answer and simply replied, I don't know. Huff asked Patterson if the description of the suspect that Darlie had given him differed from the description she had given to Waddle. He replied, I'm not sure what she gave Officer Waddle. He went on to say that he didn't speak to Waddle for a few days and that he had just read his report that he wrote out. When asked to identify the report, Patterson responded that it was not the full report. Huff, perplexed by this, asked the judge, Your Honour, we would ask to be provided with that report. We thought this was the complete report. Greg Davis responded, "Well, I believe that to be the complete report. I have no further reports from Officer Waddle, so if they are in existence, I don't have them." Patterson then went on to say that the front page was missing that detailed the offence number, the victims' names, addresses, phone numbers, and stolen or recovered property from the scene, and that he believed that apart from that, the report looked the same. He went on to say that he believed he read the report on the afternoon of the 6th or Friday the 7th of June. However, when Huff questioned how the reports were generated and distributed in the department, Patterson said the initial report would go into a tray before being reviewed and signed off by the sergeant before arriving at the Criminal Investigations Division the following day, who review the report before assigning it to an investigator. Huff honed in on how the detective would have read Officer Waddle's report on the 6th or the 7th if he had only typed up his supplement report on the 7th. Patterson said they could have come in a separate time, so he could have read the offence report prior to the supplement report, meaning according to the departmental procedures, he would only have read the offence report earliest on the 7th of June and the supplement report earliest on the 8th. Huff went on to press the detective further and asked him if, as the lead investigator, he had talked to Waddle any time between reading the first or the second report, to which he replied, "No, sir." He then completely contradicted his previous statements when he claimed to have a sudden realisation that he knows why the report was missing a page because he himself was the one who had written up the offence report. He just done this as a supplement. I took the initial report instead of Officer Waddle. Huff again requested a copy of the report, but the state could not provide it and said they do not recall seeing it. Huff then changed the direction and went back to asking Patterson about what Darlie had told him about the events of that night. When asked for details about what Darlie had said, Patterson became hesitant and uncertain, saying things like, "I don't think so, no, I don't think so, I'm not sure, and I don't remember." He further contradicted Waddle's earlier statement regarding Darlie providing aid to the boys. When Huff asked about first aid given to the boys, "Okay, did Darlie tell you that?" "I believe she did, but she said that he was administering first aid to the oldest boy over by the coffee table." "Okay, so she told you about that. What did she tell you that she did as far as first aid, if anything?" "Well, I'm not sure. It seems like at the time that she said that she placed a rag on the youngest boy, but I'm not sure if that is when she told us or not." Huff then asked if he had ever asked Darlie if she stood at the sink, to which Patterson replied, "No, sir." Huff questioned Patterson about what he did after leaving the hospital, and he said that he went back to the crime scene where he arrived early that morning. He said he met with David Neighbours, the sergeant over the crime scene, who took him on a walkthrough around the crime scene. He said Neighbours had pointed out various areas as they went. He showed him the hallway and then lead into the utility room, where he saw a rug with some blood on it, along with blood on the door handle, the door and the floor. He remembered seeing blood on the plastic runner leading to the living room area on the carpet, and also the glass coffee table and sofa. He then remembers he and Neighbours discussing the slit screen in the garage. He said he doesn't remember anything after that, and that he just went straight back to the station. This testimony is in direct conflict with Sergeant Ward's later trial testimony that Patterson had helped him search the alleyway behind the Routier home. Huff further pressed Patterson about whether or not he had spoken with any of the paramedics or firefighters, and if he had interviewed them prior to Darlie's arrest. He said he had not interviewed any of them, but had spoken to one of the firemen, but couldn't remember what was said, just that he remembered him saying, quote, "It was bad." He further went on to say there was no evidence that anyone else had interviewed them either from the reports he had read. He said that he had only interviewed Darlie and Darren Routier throughout the entire investigation. Huff asked if he had received any leads during the investigation about any other suspects. He said they did receive some leads, but he did not personally investigate them, and that they were handled by Detectives Needham and Latham. Huff then asked again about the interviews he had with Darren and Darlie, and if he took notes or recorded them. Patterson said he did not take any notes, and that even though they had access to recording equipment at the station, they didn't use it. Huff further asked Patterson the same questions he had asked Waddle: how many crime scenes he had been to, which involved stabbings, how many of those involved a mother with her children being stabbed in front of her. He also replied none to both questions. Proceedings would reconvene the following day on August the 27th, 1996. Greg Davis would address the court regarding the reports counsel had requested the previous day. He claimed that while both himself and Patterson had looked through their records, they could not find the offence report he had prepared. He did, however, provide some other supplemental reports and the arrest affidavit he had made. With that, the cross-examination of Jimmy Patterson resumed. Huff questioned him about his interview with Darlie and if she had provided a diagram upon his request, at which time the state entered the diagram Darlie had drawn on the 10th of June into evidence. Patterson testified that he had asked her to draw the diagram to show where she had been sleeping on the couch, where the suspect was standing, and the route he had taken through the kitchen. He stated that Darlie was fully compliant and did as he had asked. Darlie had marked an S where the suspect was and indicated she was sleeping on the couch adjacent to the sliding glass door with her head nearest to the TV. She had said the intruder had walked between the couch and the coffee table and went through the east side of the kitchen island and into the utility room. When Huff asked, "Did you ask her any questions on June 10th?" Patterson replied, "No, sir, not that I remember." Huff continued to press the officer. "All right, did you ask her any questions about when she saw the knife?" "Well, I'm sure I did," replied Patterson. "What did she tell you?" "Well, again, she tells me it was on the floor in the utility room." He further added that Darlie had said that when she had followed the suspect, she had seen it laying on the floor. This was a point that would become pertinent later at trial when the blood spatter expert would testify to carrying out experiments with the knife. Huff went on to correct Patterson and said, "Well, actually, isn't it part of the report that she saw it across the island?" To which Patterson replied, "Yes, sir." He later stated that she had called into the station the next day and said she had actually seen the knife once she got to the utility room. He stated that this was one of the things he viewed as an inconsistency in Darlie's story. Huff would pick up on this point and said this was more of a supplemental report, similar to that of Officer Waddle. Davis objected to his point and said that an officer providing a supplemental report or adding to their initial reports was not the same as two inconsistent stories from a suspect. The objection was overruled and Huff continued to state to the detective that Darlie changing this fact the day after was the same as Waddle changing details in his report the following day. Davis tried to object again, but the judge overruled again. Huff continued. He asked Patterson if he had confronted Darlie about not being able to see over the island prior to the phone call. "No, sir, I did not," he replied. This went towards proving that Darlie was not influenced to change this detail and she had voluntarily disclosed the information. Subsequently, Huff had made his point, so he would move on to another subject. Huff questioned Patterson regarding the arrest affidavit and the conclusions in his report. Davis once again objected, stating that the document was not offered into evidence. Although the judge overruled the objection, Huff rephrased his questioning. Did Darlie tell you she was a light sleeper? Yes, sir. Did she tell you that's why she was sleeping downstairs? Yes, sir. And you thought that was strange as she didn't hear her children being killed, is that correct? Yes, sir. When asked if he had inquired if she had taken any kind of sleep medications, he stated he didn't know if she had taken any medications. He further went on to say that the TV was on in the living room and the sound when he went in that morning. He further stated that he found it strange that she had said that she had struggled with the suspect on the couch, and later said that she had seen him at the end of the couch. Huff asked him about the part of the report regarding the absence of blood near the head of the couch where she said she was laying. Patterson said he found it strange there was no blood. Huff pressed him on the details of this. Was there any blood on the couch? Patterson stated there was blood on the foot of the couch and on the edge. Alright, was her head on the pillow? Asked Huff. Yes, sir, replied Patterson. Did you retrieve that pillow? Yes, sir. Was there blood on that pillow? Asked Huff, to which Patterson replied, I honestly can't say right now. I did not look at my notes to see. I don't think there was, but I'm not sure. Huff asked if there were any bed-sized pillows at the scene. Patterson stated there was one maroon-coloured pillow, which was the only bed-sized pillow downstairs. Patterson stated in his report that the knife being on the utility room floor was inconsistent with the evidence. Huff questioned why it was inconsistent when she had told him several times the knife was on the floor in the utility room. Patterson stated that he had been told by Cronin neighbours that the knife was never on the utility room floor. Huff then asked some pertinent questions regarding the knife. How much blood was on the knife on the countertop? How much blood had dripped onto the countertop? And the length of time it would have been on the countertop in comparison to the short amount of time it would have been on the utility room floor. This was something that would later become an important point at trial, and something I will go into further later in the series. Huff went on to ask about the kitchen sink and if Patterson had asked Darlie if she had gone to the kitchen sink. Patterson stated he never asked her about the kitchen sink. When asked about the blood on the kitchen drawer next to the sink where the towels were, Patterson once again said he couldn't remember. Huff asked about the footprints in the kitchen leading to the den and pointed out the footprints in front of the kitchen drawer and the fact that Patterson said there was no footprints going back into the utility room. Huff then confronted him about the fact that there was blood leading out to the utility room from someone who was actively bleeding, to which the detective agreed. He later honed in on this point when he asked Patterson why there would be footprints if the officer hadn't left any or disturbed any of the blood when walking back to the utility room. The arrest warrant was clearly created to paint Darlie as guilty in the eyes of the public. However, it was proven to be increasingly problematic for the state in the hearing. Huff questioned the section in the warrant that stated the security light was activated when someone was in the backyard, and if he had tested it himself. Patterson testified that he did not test it himself, did not know how long it would stay activated, the method that was used to test it, and did not check it himself. Huff pointed to the part of the affidavit that said Darlie's wounds were not consistent with the boys. Yes, sir, replied Patterson. She was stabbed, wasn't she? Yes, sir, responded the detective. She was cut, wasn't she? Yes, sir, replied Patterson. Do you believe that a person struggling with an assailant might receive different injuries than someone who is not? Huff asked. I honestly can't say, Patterson replied. Although Patterson could not answer the questions about the different injuries, he did go on to say that he did not believe Darlie's injuries were life-threatening, which seems a peculiar statement to make from someone who is supposed to be a lead homicide detective. Huff confronted him on the fact that if her injuries had been left untreated, then she would have bled to death, to which Patterson replied, I'm not sure. Huff then asked about the section of the report that discussed the glass on the kitchen floor and that Darlie had no cuts on her feet. He brought up the fact that police had gone through the kitchen and that he didn't know if the paramedics had gone into the kitchen, as he hadn't asked them, had never interviewed them, and therefore didn't know if the glass had changed position from when it was broken to the time the physical evidence team had arrived. Huff confronted Patterson about this report and the details of Darlie's arrest. The report stated that Patterson had read Darlie her rights prior to her interview. However, Patterson would contradict this in his testimony when he claimed that Bill Parker had interviewed her and he wasn't even present when the interview took place. Patterson went on to claim that a canine unit had searched the backyard and saw no signs of disturbance or footprints in the ground. Huff countered this fact by mentioning that canines do not look for footprints but pick up on scent. He asked the detective if the ground was wet, to which Patterson replied, "No, sir." He further honed in on the point that it was possible to bypass the grassed areas completely by following the concrete path that went straight to the window screen, to which Patterson agreed. He further agreed that there might not have been any footprints in the backyard. Huff continued to talk about the screen and asked if it was possible for someone to enter the screen without touching the window screen and touching the windowsill. In another contradictory statement, Patterson said that it was possible, but he didn't think so. Huff brought up the mulch outside the window screen and the fact that the investigators had stated that it was undisturbed. He asked the detective if there was mulch directly underneath the screen, to which Patterson replied, "No, sir." Huff doubled down on this point, so the fact that the mulch was undisturbed would really be of no significance at all, would it? "No, sir," replied Patterson. Huff then turned his attention to some handwritten notes Patterson had provided and a handwritten supplement report. The detective admitted that he had started the supplement report but had never finished it. Huff asked about his visit to the hospital and if he had interviewed any of the doctors, to which Patterson said he did not. He asked him about his initial interactions with Darlie Routier and if he found Darren's demeanour unusual. Patterson testified that he thought Darren's behaviour was inappropriate at first and that he talked about Darlie's breasts and how big they were. He said that Darren never asked about his children and he went between laughing and crying. This is something he later excluded in his later trial testimony. Huff zeroed in on this by stating that just because someone acts in a certain way does not mean they are guilty. "No, sir," replied Patterson. To be continued.